It seems the Salamander Man has entered the ring!
Across the countless units of Warhammer, there are dozens of different abilities, and while a great many of them are unique in some way, the majority are relatively similar or understandable in terms of how they interact with the rules of the game. In this list, we're looking at the exceptions, abilities that stand out with weird requirements, rare or unusual effects, and even surprising restrictions. We'll be covering abilities from both 40k and Age of Sigmar. The only rules are that it must be something unique to the unit's own datasheet, so things like signature spells are fair game. And starting off this list is the Master Flame rune, the one and only ability of the Auric Flamekeeper. When you set up this unit, you also set up a d6 next to him with the 1 facing up. The dice ticks up by 1 every time a friendly Fireslayer model dies within 12 of him, and when it hits 6, you can hand out one of 4 buffs to a unit at the start of the combat phase. The options are 6-up ward, fight on death, +1 damage in melee, or immediately attempting a charge. The buff lasts until the end of the combat phase, and it can only be applied to Hearthguard, Volkite Berserkers, or the new Vulcan Flameseekers warband. After activation, the dice remains in play and resets to 1, so you can use it again once it reaches 6. It's not uncommon for players to use dice to track in-game wounds or abilities, but the Auric Flamekeeper is one of the only units where the rules require you to keep a dice next to him as long as he's in play, which definitely earns him a place among unique effects. Units having reactive abilities to the destruction of other units always makes for some interesting effects, like with apothecaries generating CP off of it. Such abilities often involve your units, but this isn't entirely the case with Inevitable Death, the signature teleport of the Incar. The Incar is an epic hero monster for Eldar, and is a 350-point melee blender that halves damage and comes with one of the best evasion mobility effects in the game. Once per phase, after a unit is destroyed, you can set up the Incar as close as possible to where the last model of that unit was, as long as you don't end up in engagement range. Having a reactionary teleport is already great, and being able to do this potentially 4 times per battle round is even more impressive, so the Incar has definitely teleported its way into this list. Next on the list is the AOS version of Skarbrand, with his appropriately named ability, Skarbrand's Rage. At the beginning of each battle round, starting with the second, Skarbrand enrages if he didn't fight in both of the previous round's combat phases, meaning your opponent has to let him fight to avoid this going off. When it does go off, then until the end of this battle round, he uses the bottom of his damage table regardless of how many wounds he has left. Normally, when we see abilities that alter a damage table, they're used to allow something to fight on its top bracket, but Skarbrand is a rare example of a unit who gets stronger the more damage he takes. Assuming he's on his top bracket, Enraging will give him 8 attacks with Slaughter, up from 5, and you have to equal or beat a 1 instead of a 4 to dish out 8 mortal wounds with Carnage. It also lets you roll 5 dice with Roar of Total Rage instead of 2, with each 4 up dealing a mortal. It's always great to see abilities that are both fluffy and powerful. A giant red demon going berserk because he didn't get to fight enough is just pure Warhammer, and that's why Skarbrand is here. It's commonplace to see abilities, stratagems, or enhancements that add the keywords you want to a unit's weapons. It's another thing entirely for your opponent to hand one of your units a weapon keyword that you definitely don't want. An ability this outlandish could only come to us from the favored champion of the Changer of Ways, Magnus the Red, with his ability called Treason of Zch. This is a psychic effect that he can gain from his Unearthly Power ability. At the start of the battle round, it allows you to pick one of 3 Crimson King abilities to last for the rest of the round. At the start of your opponent's shooting phase, Treason of Zch lets you pick an enemy unit within 24 who Magnus can see, and until the end of that phase, all their ranged weapons gain Hazardous. Hazardous weapons force you to take a test after shooting or fighting with them. You roll a dice for each hazardous weapon that was used, and for each result of a 1, you choose a model to be destroyed. If it's a character, vehicle, or monster, that model takes 3 mortal wounds instead. Usually, the hazardous keyword is associated with plasma weapons or psychic attacks, but in this case, it can be put on entirely new weapons of any kind, making it a fittingly special power for the Crimson King. When it comes to buffs that augment a unit's melee prowess in 40k, it's pretty rare to hear the word double, especially with the arrival of 10th edition and its flat rates of strength for weapons that previously applied a 2x multiplier. What's even more rare than double? Make that triple, as is the case for our next ability, the Stars Are Right. Orican the Diviner is an epic hero for the Necrons, and in addition to giving a 4-up invul to whatever unit he's leading, he has this wild ability. At the start of the fight phase, he can triple the attacks and strength of his melee weapon, in addition to making every successful wound roll be treated as a crit wound. This buff only lasts the rest of the phase, and he can only use it once per game, but it makes for an extremely powerful combo. His Staff of Tomorrow normally hits on 3s with 2 attacks at strength 4, AP 3, D3 damage with devastating wounds. Under the effect of the stars are right, this becomes 6 strength 12 attacks that always proc devastating wounds, allowing this 80-point Cryptek to smash through anything smaller than an Imperial Knight and secure himself a spot on this list. What could be more unique than making your opponent's units destroy themselves? How about making them destroy each other? This War Scroll spell does just that, and it's definitely the most recent entry in terms of release date, as it comes to us credit of the newest Flesh Eater Courts leader, Usharan, Mortarch of Delusion. Glimpse of Delusion is an 18-inch spell that casts on a 7 and lets you pick a visible enemy model within range, choose a melee weapon profile it's equipped with, and make it attack another enemy unit within range of that weapon. This can lead to all sorts of unique interactions, aside from the otherwise unheard of sight of a model attacking allies. Sticking to War Scroll spells, next up is the signature spell of the God of Death himself. We're harnessing the power of appropriate containers and taking a look at Hand of Dust. It goes off on an 8, technically a 5 with Nagash's passive casting bonus, and has the very short range of just 3 inches. You pick one model that's visible and within range before taking a dice and hiding it in either your hand or under one of 2 appropriate containers. Your opponent then picks a hand or container. If they find the dice, the spell fizzles, but if they don't, their model is instantly slain. This is an extremely swingy, janky spell, to put it lightly. The short casting range makes setting this up in your hero phase very awkward, with the insta-kill often being wasted on the last couple of wounds left on whatever was able to survive melee combat against a 900-point unit. The requirement of playing Find the Dice with your opponent, and the usage of the phrase appropriate containers, is just the icing atop this truly weird and unique spell that's definitely earned 4th place. Also, if you've watched this far into the video, let me know what you think constitutes an inappropriate container for this ability. In 3rd place is easily the biggest ability on this list, which is fitting for a giant dinosaur carrying the golden prize wheel known as a Cosmic Engine. In fact, the rules on Engine of the Gods are so large that Cosmic Engine is more of its own mechanic than a traditional ability. In your shooting phase, you can activate Cosmic Engine and declare it will either harness or reserve its power. If you choose Reserve, nothing happens, but you can roll an additional d6 the next time you pick Harness. Choosing Harness lets you pick one of 4 possible outcomes that almost work like spells which can't be unbound, but any failed cast results in mortal wounds. After picking your target effect, you roll 2d6 plus an extra d6 for every time you've chosen Reserve, and you use the result to generate a power score. Hitting your goal number or higher gets you the effect, and anything less deals mortal wounds to the unit. The abilities and their required power scores are as follows. Healing Light goes off on a 7 and lets you roll a separate d3 for each of your Seraphon units wholly within 6 inches, and heal them for the result. Bolts of Azure Energy procs on a 9 and deals 1 mortal on failure. You pick a visible enemy within 24 inches and roll a number of dice equal to the power score you got, with 4 ups dealing mortals. Time Slows is cast on an 11, with failure dealing d3 mortals. It gives all your Seraphon units wholly within 6 inches strike first for the rest of the turn. Finally, Starlight Summons is impossible to get on a base 2d6. It only goes off on a 13, and miscasting deals 3 mortals. If it works, however, you can set up either 10 Saurus Warriors or 20 Skinks wholly within 6, and more than 9 from enemy units. Taking 2nd place, we have an entire datasheet and set of mechanics condensed into 3 words in the rules of one big model. Using Sir Hector. Sir Hector is the pilot of Canis Rex, a unique Imperial Knight character and the only named knight that you can take. The Knight is an interesting unit itself. It's an upgrade on the Knight Preceptor that trades its Bondsman ability and personal Oaths of Moment for critting on 5 ups and a personal free stratagem per turn. If it's destroyed, Sir Hector disembarks like it's a transport and becomes his own independent model. As for Hector himself, he's a T3, 3-wound unit with a 6-inch move and a measly 4-up save. However, he's also a lone operative on a 25mm base. This makes him pretty hard to pin down, especially if Canis Rex died to long-range shooting. Speaking of long-range, that's probably where you'll want to keep Hector. His only ranged attack is a single 12-inch pistol shot hitting on 2s at strength 5, AP 1, damage 2. There are several unique aspects to these rules that has earned them second place on this list. Aside from using transport rules to effectively summon a new unit, it's one of the few times that a single model unit has a rule specifically differentiating the model from its own unit. It's also the only time in the game where you can kill a non-monster, non-vehicle to score Bring It Down. This is because the unit Canis Rex isn't considered to be destroyed as long as Hector is alive, even after the model of Canis Rex itself is removed. This is how when, not if, he runs off to hide in the far corner of the board, you might never get credit for killing the only named Imperial Knight. Count on the Breaker of Chains to be the breaker of rules involving vehicle destruction. Finally, in first place, we have the only unit that I know of who has an ability that is mutually disabled if your opponent has the same unit, and this can occur in a total of 5 different matchups, no less. In first place is the Eye of Shirian, wielded by Archon the Everchosen. Right off the bat, this is an interesting and risky once-per-battle ability that requires you to have Archon in a Slaves to Darkness army. At the start of your hero phase, you can roll a dice whose result replaces the priority roll in the next battle round. It's a 50-50 shot at who gets the first turn in that round. 1 to 3, it's your opponent. 4 to 6, it's you. It concludes with the note that this ability cannot be used while there is an enemy Archon on the battlefield. The part to note here is on the battlefield. This might be the only time you have to kill a copy of a unit to unlock one of its abilities. Other than the obvious case of a Slaves to Darkness mirror match, you're facing this same drawback against 4 other armies. Archaon's War Master ability lets him be sided into a Nurgle, Khorne, Tzeentch, or Slaanesh army. In such a case, he'd be unable to use his own Eye of Shirian due to the rule requiring you run him in a Slaves to Darkness list, but since the ability checks for an enemy Archaon, he'd still be blocking you from using yours. Whether it's to prevent confusion, stop players from overriding each other's activations, or just because Shirian only has so many eyes to spare, this restriction adds another layer of detail to an already truly unique ability. It's also strangely fitting for a villain like this to have a "there can be only one" kind of ruling. For all this, Archon certainly earns the top spot on my list. If you enjoyed this video or learned something new, feel free to follow me for lore, lists, and analysis videos, mainly on fighting games, magic, and Warhammer. I hope to see you in the next video, and thanks for watching.